In the fall of 2024, satellite images taken over a shipyard on the Yangtze River showed something that made analysts on the other side of the world stop what they were doing and look again. Sitting in the water was a submarine hull, unlike anything China had launched before. Longer, wider at the back, shaped in a way that did not match any existing class in the public record. Within weeks, defense researchers, retired naval officers, and open-source investigators were arguing about what they were actually looking at. Some said it was a test platform. Some said it was the first of a new attack submarine generation. A few said it might be something else entirely, a vessel built around a propulsion system that would let it stay underwater longer, run quieter, and travel farther than anything China had ever put to sea. And that possibility, more than the size or the shape, is what made people nervous. Because submarines are not like other weapons. A carrier can be tracked, an airbase can be photographed, a missile launch leaves a trail of fire visible from space, but a submarine that runs quietly enough disappears completely. It becomes a hole in the ocean, and a country that can put enough of those holes in the water changes the math for everyone else. If you find this kind of breakdown useful, hit the like button and subscribe, because these take a long time to research and put together, and it genuinely helps the channel. What follows is the story of how China went from operating some of the loudest submarines in the world to building boats that increasingly worry the people whose job it is to find them. It involves stolen decades, borrowed designs, a shipyard that grew so fast it broke assumptions, and a technology gap that has been closing much faster than most people expected. But to understand why this new submarine matters, you first have to understand how far behind China used to be. For most of the Cold War, Chinese submarines were, to put it politely, not a serious threat. The first nuclear boats China built were based on Soviet designs that were already outdated when they were copied. They were loud, extremely loud. Naval sonar operators used to describe early Chinese nuclear submarines as being audible from enormous distances, which in submarine terms is the worst possible thing you can say about a boat. A submarine that can be heard is a submarine that is already dead in any real conflict. To be fair about it, the early boats were built under conditions that would have defeated almost anyone. China was attempting to design a nuclear reactor, a pressure hull, and a missile system at roughly the same time, with a scientific community that had been badly disrupted, limited access to precision manufacturing, and almost no outside help after relations with Moscow collapsed. The first ballistic missile submarine China produced spent much of its life tied up alongside a pier, rarely going anywhere useful. It existed more as a statement of ambition than as a functioning weapon. Foreign navies noted its existence, filed it away, and largely moved on. That dismissal became a habit, and habits are hard to break even when the facts underneath them start changing. The problem was not that Chinese engineers lacked talent. The problem was that quiet submarine design is one of the hardest engineering challenges humans have ever attempted, and it cannot be shortcut. Every pump, every valve, every bearing, every turbine blade inside the hull creates vibration. That vibration travels through the metal, into the water, and outward for miles. To make a submarine quiet, you have to attack noise at hundreds of separate sources at once, and you have to do it while keeping the boat safe, under crushing pressure with a nuclear reactor running inside it. Western navies spent 40 years and staggering amounts of money learning how to do that. They learned it through failure, through accidents, through thousands of hours of testing. They developed rafted machinery decks, where the entire engine room sits on a floating platform isolated from the hull. They developed anechoic tiles, rubber coatings that absorb incoming sonar pings and dampen outgoing noise. They developed natural circulation reactors that can run at low power without pumps at all, which removes one of the loudest components on the entire boat. China had none of that in the beginning. It had to build the whole thing from scratch while also building the industry capable of building it. And for a long time, progress was slow enough that foreign analysts stopped paying close attention. That was a mistake. Somewhere in the early 2000s, the trajectory changed. Part of it was money. China's defense budget grew year after year, and submarine programs got a large and consistent share. Part of it was industrial capacity, because China spent 2 decades becoming the largest shipbuilding nation on the planet, which meant steel expertise, welding expertise, precision machining, and the ability to build enormous structures to tight tolerances. And part of it, according to Western intelligence assessments, was acquisition. Some of it legitimate through Russian cooperation and imported technology, some of it not, through industrial espionage targeting naval propulsion and quieting research. Whatever the mix, the results started showing up in the water. Each new class was measurably quieter than the last. The gap that had been enormous became merely large. Then, it became uncomfortable. And the new hull, spotted in 2024, suggests it may now be something else entirely. Let me explain what actually makes a submarine dangerous, because it is not what most people think. It is not speed, it is not depth, it is not even weapons, at least not directly. The single most important quality of a submarine is its acoustic signature, which is a technical way of saying how much noise it makes and how far that noise travels. Water carries sound extraordinarily well. Under the right conditions, a sound made in one part of the ocean can be detected thousands of miles away by a sensitive enough listening array. That is not exaggeration. It is physics, and navies have built entire global systems around it. The ocean also does strange things to sound that make the whole problem far messier than it sounds on paper. Water temperature changes with depth, and it does not change smoothly. There are layers, boundaries where warm water sits on top of cold water, and sound bends when it crosses them. A submarine that drops below one of those layers can effectively vanish from a ship listening above it, because the sound waves get refracted away rather than traveling straight up. Good submarine captains hunt for those layers the way a fighter pilot hunts for cloud cover. They also learn where the ocean is naturally noisy, near busy shipping lanes, near reefs full of snapping shrimp, near river outflows churning with sediment, and they use that noise as camouflage. This is why raw technology never tells the whole story. So the entire game of submarine warfare comes down to one question: can I hear you before you hear me? If the answer is yes, you win. You maneuver into position, you take the shot, and the other boat never knew you were there. If the answer is no, you are the one who dies. There is no middle ground, and there is very little room for bravery or skill to compensate. The quieter boat almost always wins. This is why every meaningful advance in submarine design over the last 60 years has been about noise, not about going faster, not about diving deeper, about vanishing. And this is why the reported features of China's newest boat matter so much. The hull form appears to include a pump jet propulsor rather than a conventional propeller. A propeller pushes water with spinning blades, and at higher speeds those blades create cavitation, which is essentially thousands of tiny bubbles collapsing violently against the metal. Cavitation is loud. It is one of the loudest things a submarine can do. A pump jet encloses the blades inside a shrouded duct, which controls the water flow, delays cavitation to much higher speeds, and drops the noise signature significantly. Western navies have used pump jets for decades. The British moved to them first. The Americans followed. Russia developed its own versions. For China to be fielding a mature one is not revolutionary in an absolute sense, but it is a very clear signal about where their engineering has arrived. There are also signs of progress in areas that are far harder to photograph. Analysts studying close-range imagery of newer Chinese boats have pointed to what appear to be anechoic coatings covering large portions of the hull, the same rubberized tiles that Western and Russian submarines have used for decades to absorb enemy sonar pulses and muffle internal noise leaking outward. Applying those tiles properly is genuinely difficult. If the bonding fails, they peel off in patches during patrols, which not only ruins the acoustic benefit, but creates turbulence that makes the boat louder than it would have been bare. Several navies struggled with exactly that problem for years. Getting it right is a quiet indicator of manufacturing maturity that rarely makes headlines. There is also the question of the reactor. Nuclear propulsion is what separates a coastal submarine from a global one. A conventional diesel-electric submarine has to come near the surface regularly to run its engines and recharge its batteries, which is the moment it is most vulnerable. A nuclear submarine does not. It can stay submerged for months, limited only by food and crew endurance. It can cross oceans without surfacing once. But nuclear reactors have a noise problem of their own. They need coolant circulating constantly, and pumping coolant means pumps, and pumps mean vibration. The solution that Western navies developed is natural circulation, where the reactor is designed so that heat differences alone move the coolant at low power settings. No pumps running, dramatically less noise. It is enormously difficult to engineer safely. Reports suggest China's newest reactor designs incorporate this. If true, the practical effect is that a Chinese nuclear submarine cruising quietly at patrol speed is now much harder to detect than the previous generation. Not silent. Nothing is silent, but harder. It is worth pausing on the conventional side of the fleet too, because the nuclear boats get all the attention while the diesel-electric submarines quietly do most of the work. China operates a large number of them, and modern versions use air-independent propulsion, systems that let a conventional submarine generate power underwater for weeks without ever coming shallow. These boats are slower and shorter range than nuclear submarines, but in the confined, shallow, cluttered waters near the coast, they can be extraordinarily hard to find. A conventional boat sitting almost motionless on battery power is one of the quietest objects in the ocean, quieter than any nuclear submarine, because a reactor can never be fully shut down while the boat is operating. For defending nearby waters, that is exactly the tool you want. And this is where it stops being a technical story and becomes a strategic one. For 70 years, one fact has quietly underpinned the security architecture of the Pacific. American and Allied submarines could operate wherever they wanted, and Chinese forces could not reliably find them. Meanwhile, Chinese submarines leaving their bases could be tracked from the moment they left the pier. That asymmetry was the foundation. It meant that in any serious crisis, one side had eyes and teeth in places the other could not see. That asymmetry is eroding. Look at the geography and you understand why China cares so much. Chinese submarines leaving their main bases have to pass through what strategists call the first island chain, a rough line running from Japan down through the Ryukyu Islands, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Indonesia. It is not a wall, but it is a series of narrow passages, and narrow passages are exactly where you place listening equipment. For decades, those choke points have been monitored intensively. A loud submarine trying to slip through was a loud submarine getting detected. A genuinely quiet submarine changes that calculation. Not because detection becomes impossible, but because it becomes uncertain. And uncertainty is the entire product that submarines sell. A commander who is 90% sure he knows where the enemy boats are will act decisively. A commander who is 50% sure will hesitate, hold back forces, and keep ships further from shore. That hesitation is worth more than any single weapon. Then there is the deterrent side, which is arguably even more important. China operates ballistic missile submarines, boats whose entire purpose is to carry nuclear missiles and hide. The logic of these vessels is simple and grim. If your land-based missiles could all be destroyed in a surprise attack, an enemy might be tempted to try. But if you have submarines at sea that nobody can locate, carrying missiles that could answer any attack, then nobody is tempted. That is what deterrence actually means in practice. China's problem has been that its missile submarines were not reliably hidden. If they can be tracked from their bases, the deterrent is theoretical rather than real. A quieter boat with longer-range missiles fixes that. It means China gains, for the first time, a survivable sea-based nuclear force comparable in concept to what the United States, Russia, Britain, and France have had for decades. Whether you think that is stabilizing or destabilizing depends a lot on your assumptions. Some analysts argue that a secure second strike capability actually reduces the chance of war because it removes the incentive for anyone to strike first. Others argue that it emboldens conventional aggression because a country confident in its nuclear backstop feels freer to take risks below that threshold. Both arguments have serious people behind them, and neither has been resolved. Weapons matter here as well, and they get overlooked. A submarine is a delivery platform, and what it delivers determines how much of a problem it is. Modern boats carry heavyweight torpedoes guided by wire from the launching submarine, capable of running for tens of kilometers and re-attacking if they miss. They also carry cruise missiles that can be fired from underwater against ships or land targets hundreds of kilometers away, which means a submarine no longer has to get close to be dangerous. Chinese boats are reported to carry both. The practical effect is that the threat radius around a single submarine is now enormous, and defending against it means defending a vast area rather than a narrow one. But before we get carried away, there are real reasons for skepticism, and they deserve to be said clearly. Almost everything publicly known about this new submarine comes from satellite imagery, leaked assessments, and analyst inference. Nobody outside a small circle in Beijing knows the actual acoustic performance of these boats. Hull shape tells you something about design intent. It does not tell you how quiet the machinery inside is, and machinery is where most of the noise comes from. You can build a beautifully shaped hull and fill it with badly isolated equipment and end up with a loud submarine. There is also the matter of what happened in 2024, when reports emerged that a Chinese submarine sank at a shipyard pier. Not at sea, at the dock. Chinese authorities did not confirm it, and details remain murky, but multiple Western officials treated it as credible. If accurate, it is a reminder that building complex submarines is brutally difficult, and that rapid expansion produces mistakes. Every submarine nation has had accidents. But an accident at the pier suggests problems in quality control or construction management, not just bad luck at sea. And even a perfect submarine is only as good as the people operating it. This is the part that technology enthusiasts consistently underrate. Submarine warfare is one of the most demanding human activities in the military world. Crews spend months in a steel tube with no natural light, no privacy, and no possibility of rescue if something goes wrong. Sonar operators develop an ear for the ocean that takes years to build. Captains learn to read water conditions, temperature layers, and thermal boundaries that bend sound in ways that can hide a boat or expose it. Western navies have accumulated that expertise across generations of continuous patrols. Chinese crews have far less deep-water operational history. They are building it, patrol by patrol, and they are building it faster than expected. But experience cannot be manufactured. It has to be lived. So the honest assessment is somewhere in the middle. This is not a magic weapon that overturns the balance overnight. It is also not a propaganda hull that means nothing. It is evidence of a long, sustained, well-funded industrial effort finally producing results, and the trend line matters more than any single boat. Now let us talk about what the other side is doing, because none of this happens in a vacuum. The response has been building for years. The United States has poured money into undersea sensor networks, including fixed arrays on the seabed and mobile listening systems towed behind ships. It has invested heavily in unmanned underwater vehicles, essentially robotic submarines that can loiter in an area for weeks, listening, at a fraction of the cost of a crewed boat. It has expanded patrol aircraft fleets designed specifically to hunt submarines from above, dropping sonar buoys in patterns across suspected transit routes. Australia, Japan, and India have all increased their own anti-submarine investments. The AUKUS agreement, which will eventually give Australia nuclear-powered attack submarines, was justified almost entirely in these terms. Japan has quietly built some of the most capable conventional submarines in the world, boats specifically designed for the shallow, complex, noisy waters near the island chain where nuclear boats are less comfortable operating. There is a genuine arms race happening underwater, and most people have no idea it is going on. It does not produce dramatic footage. It produces contracts, sensor deployments, and quiet patrols that never get reported. But the money involved is enormous and growing. And here is something that complicates the whole picture in a way that does not get enough attention. The ocean may be getting harder to hide in for everyone. For 70 years, the fundamental advantage of the submarine has been that water is opaque. You cannot see through it. Radar does not work. Optical sensors are useless past a short distance. Sound is essentially the only tool, and sound is unreliable because the ocean is full of noise from waves, ships, marine life, and temperature layers that bend and scatter signals. But new detection approaches are emerging that do not rely purely on sound. Some involve detecting tiny magnetic anomalies caused by a large steel object moving through the Earth's magnetic field. Some involve looking for extremely subtle temperature differences in the water column left behind by a submarine's wake. Some involve satellite systems attempting to spot surface disturbances caused by a submerged vessel. And increasingly, all of these approaches are being combined with machine learning systems capable of pulling faint patterns out of enormous data sets that a human analyst would never notice. None of these are mature yet. Several may never work reliably. But if any of them do, the entire logic of undersea warfare changes, and it changes for everyone, including the country that just spent decades building quieter boats. There is a real possibility that China is investing heavily in perfecting a capability right as that capability starts becoming vulnerable. It would not be the first time in military history that has happened. Battleships were never more sophisticated than in the decade before aircraft made them obsolete. But that is speculation about the future. Let us return to the present and to what actually changes right now. The most immediate effect is on how the Pacific is planned for. Naval planning is fundamentally about assumptions. How close can surface ships approach a coastline? How much escort protection does a supply convoy need? How many aircraft have to be assigned to search rather than strike? Every one of those assumptions rests on estimates of what enemy submarines can do. If those estimates shift, everything downstream shifts with them. More escorts means fewer ships available for other missions. More search aircraft means fewer strike aircraft. Ships forced to operate further from shore means longer flight distances, shorter time on station, and more tanker aircraft required to keep everything moving. None of that is dramatic on its own. All of it together significantly reduces what a force can accomplish. That is the real value of a quiet submarine fleet. Not sinking ships. Forcing the other side to spend enormous resources preparing for the possibility that ships might be sunk. The second effect is on Taiwan specifically, since that is where most of this tension ultimately points. Any scenario involving Taiwan depends heavily on sea control. Ships have to move, supplies have to cross water. Amphibious forces, if they were ever used, are extraordinarily vulnerable while at sea. Submarines are the single most effective tool for threatening all of that, which is why Taiwan itself has invested in building its own submarines despite enormous political and technical obstacles. Chinese submarines complicate any intervention. Allied submarines complicate any invasion. Both sides know this, and both sides are building accordingly. The undersea domain has become the quiet center of gravity in a confrontation that most public discussion frames in terms of aircraft and missiles. The third effect is on time. Submarine programs are generational. A boat designed today enters service in a decade and serves for 30 years after that. When China launches a new class in the mid-2020s, it is making a statement about the 2050s. That long horizon is why analysts pay such close attention to hull shapes and shipyard construction. You are not watching current capability. You are watching intent about the future, made concrete in steel. And the shipyards themselves tell a story. The facility on the Yangtze has expanded dramatically over the past decade, with new hulls large enough to build multiple submarines simultaneously under cover, hidden from satellite view. That covered construction is itself significant. It means the outside world sees less later and has to infer more. The scale of that expansion is worth dwelling on because production capacity is its own form of power. A country that can build one excellent submarine every 4 years is in a very different position from a country that can build 3 good ones in the same time. Fleets win wars, not individual boats. Submarines need maintenance, and a vessel in dry dock is a vessel that cannot patrol, which means you need roughly 3 hulls to keep one continuously at sea. American shipyards have struggled with backlogs and workforce shortages for years, delivering attack submarines slower than planned. Chinese yards, whatever their quality issues, are not short of capacity or workers. That contrast is one of the quieter reasons analysts have grown uneasy. So where does this leave us? China has spent roughly 40 years climbing a technical mountain that took Western navies just as long. It started from a position so far behind that it was barely relevant. It is now producing boats that serious professionals treat as serious problems. That progress is real, it is documented, and dismissing it would be foolish. At the same time, the gap has not closed. American attack submarines remain, by most credible assessments, the quietest and most capable in the world, backed by decades of operational experience and a sensor network that no other country can match. Chinese crews are still building the deepwater experience that turns good hardware into effective forces. And the 2024 Pier incident, whatever exactly happened, suggests the growing pains are not over. The honest conclusion is uncomfortable for people who want a clean answer. This submarine does not change everything overnight, but it changes something. It moves a line that had been stable for a long time, and lines that move once tend to keep moving. What makes the undersea competition genuinely different from other military rivalries is how invisible it is. Nobody watches it happen. There are no parades, no flyovers, no dramatic footage. Boats leave port, disappear for months, and come back. Whatever they did in between stays classified for decades, sometimes forever. Which means the balance underwater could shift substantially, and the general public would find out years later, if at all. The people who understand it best are the ones least able to talk about it. Everyone else, including everyone making this video and everyone watching it, is working from satellite photos, leaked fragments, and educated guesses. That is worth sitting with. The most consequential military competition of our era is happening in a place nobody can see, between machines designed specifically not to be found, and the public conversation about it is built almost entirely on inference. Maybe the most important thing about China's new submarine is not any specific feature. It is what its existence proves, that a country which could not build a competitive submarine in 1985 can build one that worries the world's best navies in 2025. That industrial capability, sustained investment, and patience can close gaps that once looked permanent. That lesson does not stay confined to submarines. It applies to aircraft engines, to semiconductors, to space launch, to every field where one country's lead was assumed to be structural rather than temporary. The submarine is just the example where the stakes are highest and the visibility is lowest. The ocean covers most of the planet, and almost all of it is dark, cold, and empty. Somewhere in that darkness right now, there are submarines from half a dozen countries moving slowly through the water, listening. Most of them will never fire a weapon. That is the point. Their entire job is to exist, to be hard to find, and to make certain calculations look too risky to attempt. Whether China's newest addition to that darkness genuinely changes the balance, or simply narrows a gap that remains, is something we will probably not know with confidence for many years. But the direction of travel is not in dispute. The competition beneath the surface is accelerating. The technology on both sides is improving faster than at any point since the Cold War, and the margins that once felt comfortable are getting thinner. The quiet war has always been the one that mattered most. It is just getting quieter. If this was worth your time, hit like and subscribe. Every week we break down the technology, engineering, and strategy shaping the world that most coverage skips over entirely. Turn on notifications so the next one actually reaches you. Now here is the question I want your take on. Do you think a genuinely survivable Chinese nuclear deterrent makes the Pacific safer, by removing the temptation to strike first, or more dangerous, by lowering the risk of everything below that line? I do not think there is an obvious answer, and I would rather hear disagreement than agreement. Let me know in the comments.